Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. This video is about hot tariff updates. Right now, a lot of people think we haven't seen any effects from the tariffs yet because the tariffs are new. The tariffs that have been announced that have been creating all the turmoil in the asset markets, in stock markets. A lot of people believe that nothing has really happened yet. The tariffs that have been introduced have not made any impact yet. That's actually not true. So in this video, I'm going to explain some of the things that have already happened and that are happening right now. But to start off with, tariffs, why even have tariffs? Why go there? Why have new tariffs? There's a lot of reasons. Probably the main reason is poverty in the U.S. Poverty in the U.S. has increased, and between 4 to 5 million jobs have been lost, U.S. jobs have been lost to China. So China uses slave labor to make a lot of their products, and China sells products below the cost of manufacture also, which is an unfair tactic. It's called dumping. And when a large country is able to do that to another country, like the U.S. begins losing jobs. 4 to 5 million lost U.S. jobs to China. Okay? And Canada, Japan, and the European Union impose tariffs and other non-tariff barriers to U.S. Goods. And that has resulted in a loss of 5 million U.S. jobs to Canada, the EU, and Japan, and other countries, smaller impacts. But the bottom line is, if you're involved in a trade relationship with another country and that other country is being unfair, you have the option to try to correct that so that you don't suffer all these millions of lost jobs. That's a lot of job loss. And it creates poverty in the U.S., and we really cannot afford to have poverty in this country. There's too many people who would love to have a decent job if they existed, and a lot of them have gone to other countries because other countries are either subsidizing or using slave labor or dumping or erecting barriers, tariff and non-tariff barriers to U.S. products. So it's an option for a country to say we want to increase the number of jobs in our country for our citizens, and that's kind of why tariffs are important. Okay, so there's 3 states that have lost more jobs than others. Texas, California, and New Hampshire have lost the largest number of jobs for these sorts of reasons, for the unfair trade reasons. California and Texas are the 2 biggest states in the country, so that makes sense. And again, poverty in the U.S. results from all the lost jobs. So one of the jobs of a country's leadership is to protect its citizens. And there's a couple of ways to do that. The one way is militarily protect the country so that citizens are safe, so that there's a good deterrent against being attacked, right? So the U.S. military is strong, and it's a deterrent. Other countries will tend not to want to attack the U.S. Because of that deterrent, the strong military. So citizens are protected. Another way leadership can protect citizens is to make sure they don't suffer poverty. Poverty is a miserable condition. Poverty is just a miserable condition for people. A lot of the homelessness problem in this country would go away if some of these jobs would come back. So that's kind of why tariffs are important sometimes, not all the time. If a country needs to impose tariffs, they really don't. They prefer not to have to do that. They prefer their trading partners to engage in open trade, free trade, and fair trade. So a country like the U.S. Would prefer not to have to increase tariffs. But a lot of U.S. leaders have had to use tariffs and tariff policy because other countries are treat us unfairly. As an example, President Biden's tariffs. One thing he did, President Biden kept all of President Trump's first term tariffs, the tariffs that President Trump imposed in his first term. President Biden kept almost all of those. I believe almost all of them or all of them. And President Biden increased and added new tariffs. So President Biden, a country's leadership protects its citizens. President Biden was no different. A lot of U.S. leaders have had to use tariffs and other trade policies to protect citizens. And President Biden, he stepped up to the plate and he did that. So President Biden mostly hit tariffs that were on China because China has been the most unfair trading partner. As an example, President Biden raised President Trump's 25% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100%. President Biden quadrupled the tariffs on imported Chinese electric vehicles because they were dumping. They would wipe out the U.S. Electric vehicle manufacturers practically overnight if President Biden had not done this. President Biden quadrupled Trump's 25% to 100% tariffs on electric vehicles. President Biden also raised first-term Trump's Russia tariffs to 35%. So that was an example where the two examples actually, where he took tariffs that President Trump's first term imposed, and he raised them. So one thing President Biden did is he imposed a 271% tariff on Chinese solar panels. Huge tariff on Chinese solar panels. So a country's leadership protects its citizens militarily and economically to try to keep as few people out of poverty as possible. So people have thought there's been no effect from tariffs yet. It's actually not true. President Biden relied on President Trump's tariffs, kept most of them or all of them, increased some of them, and created new ones. And President Trump in his second term has already as we all know, has already acted responsibly, and he's picking up where President Biden left off with tariffs and then some. He's actually being pretty assertive about tariffs. So this is only a partial list of new tariffs to protect U.S. jobs and to protect U.S. companies. So one thing President Trump's already done, 145% tariff on Chinese textiles. Textiles are, garments, things people wear, clothing products, cloth products, onshoring of manufacturing. A lot of companies, if you've seen this in the news, have been making announcements that they are onshoring manufacturing in huge numbers. And this is just a few of them. Taiwan Semiconductor. Semiconductors are computer chips. Taiwan Semiconductor is investing $100 billion to onshore semiconductor manufacturing inside the United States. Honda, Hyundai, Volvo, Volkswagen, Nissan, Rolls-Royce, Siemens. Siemens is an old company. It's massive. It's German-based. Merck, also German-based. All these companies have announced they are onshoring manufacturing in the U.S., into the U.S. So that's really good. So a country's leadership protects its citizens. These companies are coming here to create manufacturing jobs. That's really good. To keep people out of poverty is essential because people who are not in poverty have a much better attitude and a much better sense of hope about their lives. So the more jobs, the better. You can't really have too many jobs. If there were so many jobs that 5 employers were trying to entice you to work for them, that would be a fantastic situation. So a couple of other companies, Roche, which is a huge pharmaceutical company, Novartis, and a bunch of other companies have announced since President Trump's second term started, announced plans to commence manufacturing in the U.S. So a lot of that's already taking place, ramping up. So let's see here. Okay, so other tariffs President Trump in his second term is imposing are on steel and aluminum manufacturers to protect U.S. domestic manufacturers of steel and aluminum products. That's necessary for defense, for national defense. President Trump has imposed a 25% tariff on all imported foreign-made cars. 25% tariff. That will help General Motors. That will help Ford. It will help U.S. auto manufacturers. So the big impact that President Trump is currently, working on, tariffs on China. Okay, so some of the products that China is going to get heavy tariffs on: laptop computers, smartphones, semiconductors, computer chips, hard drives, and other electronic goods, up to 100% tariffs. So here's what a tariff does. Instead of buying a product made by slave labor, if that same product, the price increases, that price is now competitive with onshore made products. So, for example, Apple, as an example of a company that is leaving China, Apple has made announcements to invest heavily in the U.S., to manufacture in the U.S. So, but the point is that tariffs on China, President Trump is really focusing on them. President Biden did too. President Biden imposed a massive tariff on Chinese solar panels because China is the biggest trade cheat on the planet, unfortunately. I think it's probably a learning curve from them because it's a communist country. They came to capitalism slowly. They are probably still in a learning phase. If you compare China to Russia, though, China is much further along in terms of being able to provide jobs for its citizens compared to Russia. Russia is sort of an unproductive country, so they're kind of lost. Russia is kind of lost right now. China is doing much better. China's manufacturing, they may be unfair about it, but they will eventually come to their senses and they will act more reasonably and more fair. Russia has a heck of a lot of catching up to do compared to China. So I don't understand that because China is so much bigger. It's so much more difficult to get China to where it is now with advanced manufacturing. And Russia, most of us have bought so many products that were manufactured in China. How many products made in Russia have we bought? Any? Has anyone bought even one product? So Russia's in big trouble. Just my opinion. So the tariff effect. So what happens when the tariffs are imposed? The price of slave labor-made products will now increase to the true cost of manufacturing. So U.S.-made products are now going to become more price competitive. That creates jobs again in the U.S., especially in manufacturing. So a country's leadership protects its citizens, and the U.S. has had this pretty much an open-door policy with as much as possible anyways, because most of the U.S. leadership through the years has favored free trade and as little as possible on the tariffs and the restrictions to trade. But poverty in this country, in the U.S., is really increasing. The homelessness problem. There's way too much poverty in this country. And the reason is too many jobs have gone to unfair trading partners. We have to bring those back. That will help partially solve the homelessness problem. There are so many college-educated people who are homeless. You would be shocked. Just a lot of people, even people with graduate degrees, who have become homeless. That wouldn't be happening except for all this job loss to unfair competition. So that's kind of President Biden and President Trump are doing what a country's leadership is supposed to do: protect citizens economically and militarily, right? So regardless of which side of the fence you're on politically, it is still the country's leadership job that's one of their jobs, is to protect the citizens. And both these guys, both President Trump and President Biden, have elements of that in the work that they've done. So if you have any questions about this, the thing is though, all these announcements that these companies have made to onshore manufacturing, a lot of people think there's no effect from the tariffs yet, but a lot of these tariffs are already in place. They're already affecting pricing of offshore products, and it's going to increase, right? But there are effects already happening, and there's already a lot of jobs in the works for U.S. citizens. So it's a really cool thing. It's a good thing. We just have to be patient and let it happen and watch it happen. So if you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer. You can post questions in the comments. I really want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.